confirm that the individual in question is a dual national who resides in Lebanon.
He's also at large, according to John Bear. The federal government say they're working with authorities right now in Bulgaria to investigate a terrorist suspect with dual Canadian-Lebanese nationality. Well, we don't know if it's Lebanese nationality. It resides in Lebanon, dual Canadian citizen, though. The suspect was allegedly involved in killing 6 people in a bus bombing last year. 5 Israelis and a Bulgarian driver. The Bulgarian government says the Canadian dual national has links to the militant group Hezbollah, raising questions about why was a Canadian passport holder involved there, how deep is Hezbollah's involvement here in Canada. Lots of questions, very few answers. Now let's try to dig deeper into this. Hampson of Carleton University is here. The executive director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's Mark Dubowitz is in Washington, and the former assistant director of intelligence with CSIS, now our security and intel expert, Ray Boisvert, is in Toronto. Gents, good to talk to you. Let me start with you, Mark Dubowitz. This story, you have been on this program for a long time, talking about Hezbollah's involvement in Canada. Talk about that in relation to now a passport holder allegedly being a suspect here.
Hezbollah has been operating in Canada for over 20 years. You've got major Hezbollah figures who've been using Canada to procure WMD parts, dual-use equipment, raise money. Major figures who've been operating in sleeper cells, operating in Canada, and working very closely with the Iranians, with the IRGC, with the Quds Force. So Canada has been a favorite destination for Hezbollah in Iran, and it's no surprise that you're seeing another Hezbollah figure with a Canadian passport who has now been implicated in a major terrorist attack.
Ray Boisvert, your response to this, what does it tell you about maybe Hezbollah's operations here in Canada? And again, you know what Mark Dubowitz has been saying. He has been on this program saying that the Iranians have run this kind of program right out of their embassy before it was closed. What's your view?
Oh, it's not just unique for Canada. I don't disagree with Mark in the sense that they've had a significant presence in Canada, probably going back a good 30-plus years. There have been a number of allegations and suspicions, and most of them, I think, are well-founded about everything from fundraising to procurement issues. And there have been those who have been engaged sufficiently to want to go offshore and go and work directly with Hezbollah and indirectly with Iran. So certainly that same footprint, but Canada is not unique. It's not alone. The U.S. has suffered many of the same symptoms, same in Western Europe. In this case, though, we have, looks like another bit of evidence that's clear that a Canadian has gone offshore to commit harm to others.
Fen, what's your take? When a Canadian, now we've got Algeria, the minister not talking about or confirming any Canadian involvement in the Algerian hostage-taking crisis at the gas plant there, but confirming there's a lot of evidence of this one. What does this tell us about Canadian passports and or security here?
It tells us that we're slackers when it comes to security. That's the way it's certainly being seen by our allies. I mean, this is just one incident in what appear to be a whole series of incidents. The case of Dr. Arthur Porter, the case of Delil earlier, the naval officer who was selling secrets to the Russians. You know, one snowflake doesn't make for winter, but what we have here is an avalanche. And it's not going to help our reputation. It's not going to help us in the ongoing negotiations we have with the Americans to kind of get beyond the border, which means sharing security, closer security cooperation. I mean, there's some very, very troubling questions here.
Mark, jump in on that. What troubling questions are raised for you, if any?
Well, you know, it takes the American in Washington to defend the Canadians. I mean, I would say that the Canadian government deserves quite a bit of praise. I mean, remember, Canada has designated Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. They've designated the Quds Force as a terrorist organization. They've added Iran to the state sponsor of terrorism list. They've allowed victims of terrorism to sue Iranians and Hezbollah in Canadian courts. So I think the Canadian government deserves a lot of praise for taking some really significant steps that we're looking for our European allies to take. So Canada has really led the way. Having said that, you know, as I said, Iran and Hezbollah has been operating for years in Canada, raised right. They operate in the United States and Western Europe, all over the world. I think it's now an enforcement issue, and it's a resource allocation issue. CSIS and the RCMP and Canadian authorities need more resources to crack down on these procurement networks, these financing networks, because ultimately we're talking about sleeper cells in Canada who could do serious harm to Canadians. And I think it's important to defend Canada and defend Canadians from the threat posed by Hezbollah and Iran.
Ray, what's your take on that? Are there enough resources dedicated to counterproliferation or against Hezbollah operating in Canada and or Canadians that might be targeted for this kind of activity?
No, in short, not enough. But then again, you can always give more and more resource institutions. They all have to make decisions based on threat matrices, and they have to decide how best to place their resources. I think it's fair to say that proliferation and the whole piece on counterintelligence have taken a bit of a beating over the years, and they're far lower priorities. Events like this will certainly raise that jeopardy level and make it clear we have to do something about it. Ultimately, though, I think we do have to take a look at proliferation and fundraising, and we have to take a look at some of the drivers behind that. Why are young Canadians, or Canadians in general, or persons who have documents and have some sort of status here, leaving Canada to engage? It's not the first event. We've had one, for example, in Algeria that isn't quite confirmed yet, but likely to have similar sort of elements to it. So it's a big piece, and I think proliferation is one that we have to get busy on because the consequences are dear, especially when it comes to the Iranian issue.
All right, Fred, you wanted to jump in on that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the common response is, you know, there are not enough resources, but I think there's a deeper problem here. Our security and intelligence services are clearly not on the same page, working as closely as they should with our immigration, refugee officials. I mean, they're clearly the government's got to knock some bureaucratic heads here and say, look, you've got to start working much more effectively together, and it goes right down to the policing level at the local level. And we still have some big problems. Yes, we've come a long way since the Millennium Bomber, but the fact is our reputation is on the line. These are major global incidents, and it's not going to help us.
Ray, pull back the curtain if you would. All right. We have very little information right now. Canadians say, all right, there's a dual national. That's all we know. He's at large. That's all we know. He resides in Lebanon. We don't know if he's still in Lebanon. Government's not telling us very much. Peel back the curtain. What would CSIS now be doing, considering John Baird told the public he's only found out about this within the last week or so?
There's no doubt CSIS would be in the lead position because this is more a security intelligence operation. There certainly are some criminal investigative elements that the RCMP will be engaged on. CSIS does a lot of work outside of Canada, engaging other local services and trying to put together some of the disparate pieces to give them a good threat picture. Hezbollah in that part of the world has been not as well known as it is, for example, how it's reemerged in Latin America. There's a really interesting piece that is very much closer to North America that involves big Iranian Hezbollah presence in Argentina and Brazil and other countries, especially Venezuela. So CSIS officers around the world engage, they do investigations, they run sources against those sort of networks and organizations, and they try to get a sense of, is there a foreign security apparatus, which is the military effective execution wing of Hezbollah in Canada, or is it targeting Canadian interests? That's their primary objective. Secondly, are any of those units or organizations targeting any of our allies? And that's a secondary piece, almost equally as important. So it is about collecting intelligence from running sources, both in Canada and abroad, and it's a lot of liaison work. And I agree, I think credibility is on the line. We do have to do probably a better job of coordination, and we certainly will. There'll be a lot of eyes cast on Canada in terms of what are its citizens doing, and it may have ramifications for traveling Canadians. Canadian passport holders had a lot of free reign. That may change over time with more of these incidents.
I got 10 seconds here. Fen, you want to jump in real quick?
Yeah, I mean, we got to be looking at who we're giving passports to, and to say this is a dual national, trying to distance ourselves from the case as Minister Baird is doing is simply not acceptable.
Evan, the nightmare scenario is an attack against America originating in Canada, involving Hezbollah, IRGC, and Quds Force, and with things heating up on the Iranian front, the possibility of military strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, I think Canadian authorities are going to crack down and crack down quickly.
All right, this is early days in this case. Right now we're following it closely. Mark Dubowitz, Fred Hampson, and our security and intelligence expert, Ray Boisvert. Gents, thanks for being here.
Thanks very much.